Hours before Princess Diana entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, she reportedly made a private phone call that revealed something the world would only understand much later. She was not talking like a woman in crisis. She was talking about the future, about William and Harry, about stepping away from the relentless public life that had followed her since she was 19, about finally building a life that belonged to her, away from the palace, away from the cameras, and away from the pressure that had defined nearly every year of her adulthood. And according to later accounts of that conversation, Diana said something hauntingly simple. She was tired of running. What makes those words so difficult to hear today is what came next. Within hours, the future she was describing would disappear inside a Paris tunnel. But to understand why that final conversation matters, and why it changes the way her last night is often remembered, you have to understand the woman who arrived in Paris on August 30th, 1997. August 30th, 1997. Paris, late evening. The Ritz Hotel sits on the Place Vendôme like it has always sat there, unmoved, certain of itself, the kind of building that absorbs the events inside it without changing its expression. August 30th, 1997. Paris, late evening. The Ritz Hotel sits on the Place Vendôme like it has always sat there, unmoved, certain of itself, the kind of building that absorbs the events inside it without changing its expression. Diana had been inside for several hours. She had eaten dinner with Dodi Fade in the private dining room on the first floor. She had been photographed arriving, as she was always photographed arriving by the lenses that had followed her across 3 countries that summer. The images would appear in newspapers the following morning. She is looking toward the camera with the particular composure of someone who has long since stopped expecting the cameras not to be there. At some point in the evening, before the car was called, before the decision was made to leave through the rear entrance rather than the front, before everything that followed, she made a telephone call. Not from the room's formal telephone. From her personal mobile, the number known only to a small circle of people who were not palace staff, not press officers, not institutional intermediaries of any kind. The call lasted several minutes. What she said, preserved in the testimony of the person who received it, documented in accounts that emerged only after the investigations into her death had run their course and the people closest to her had found across years. The language to speak about what that summer had contained was not what the public version of her final hours had ever included. We are going to come to exactly what was said, but first you need to understand the summer of 1997 in full, because the woman who made that call was not the Diana of the tabloid coverage from those weeks. The holiday photographs, the romance speculation, the breathless documentation of a princess apparently liberated. She was considerably more complicated than that. And what she said on that call was the most honest account she ever gave of where she actually was. The summer of 1997 had begun in Angola, January. Diana in protective gear, walking through cleared minefields outside Humbo, sitting beside landmine survivors in a rehabilitation center, holding the hand of a 13-year-old girl named Sandra Thiyika, who had lost her leg and was learning, in a room with no adequate equipment and insufficient medication, to walk again. The images from Angola moved around the world in 48 hours. Politicians complained. The Foreign Office issued careful statements about the complexity of international arms policy. Conservative MPs described Diana as a loose cannon, a meddler, a woman who did not understand the geopolitical implications of what she was photographed doing. She did not respond to any of it. She went to Bosnia in August. She met survivors. She sat in the same rooms. She held the same kinds of hands. She made the same quiet, specific, undramatic human contact that had always been behind the photographs and the public role and the institutional title, the actual substance of what she was doing. The work was not performance. Everyone who accompanied her on those visits, the journalists, the charity workers, the local staff who had no interest in managing her image, described the same thing. The cameras were there, yes. But what Diana did when the cameras were in the room was identical to what she did when they were not. She was present, fully, unusually, in the way that very few public figures achieve, because very few public figures have stopped requiring the room to reflect their own importance back at them. She had stopped requiring that years ago. Between Angola and Bosnia, she had spent time with her sons. William was 15 that summer. Harry was 12. They had been at Balmoral with their father and the royal family for the August holiday. The same Balmoral, the same ritual gathering, the same institutional rhythm that had organized the Windsor summers since before any of them were born. Diana had her own arrangements, her own calendar, independent of the palace's schedule for the first time in 16 years. She could choose where she was and with whom, subject to the custody arrangements that had been part of the divorce settlement. She had been with Dodi Fade in the south of France in late July. The photographs from that holiday became the most discussed images of the summer. Diana on a boat, laughing in the Mediterranean sun, apparently free in a way the public had not seen before. The tabloid version of those photographs was, "Here is Diana happy at last." The more accurate version, preserved in the accounts of people who spoke with her during that period, was more nuanced. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. She was happy, and she was uncertain, and she was thinking carefully, in the way she had always thought carefully, even when the institution had required her to perform certainty she did not feel, about what came next. What came next was the question on that call. The person who received Diana's call that evening was someone she had known for years. Not a public figure. Not someone whose name appears in the official record of Diana's life. One of the small number of people who existed in the private geography of her world, the geography that was not managed by press officers or palace secretaries, or the institutional machinery that had processed her public existence for a decade and a half. She had these people. Not many. The toll of her visibility, the way that proximity to Diana attracted attention that most private people found unsustainable, meant that the circle was small, but it was real. And it was the circle she called when she was not performing. The call came through in the early evening, Paris time. She said, "I need to tell you something, not urgently, not with the register of crisis." In the tone she used when she had been turning something over for some time and had reached the point where it needed a voice outside her own head. She said, "I think I'm going to step back from public life." Hold that sentence, because it requires the weight of everything that preceded it. Diana stepping back from public life in 1997 was not the same thing it would have been in 1985 or 1990 or even 1995. By the summer of 1997, she had already, through the divorce and the removal of the HRH designation and the formal separation from the palace machinery, stepped back from the institutional version of public life. She was no longer Princess of Wales in the constitutional sense. She was no longer bound by the protocols that had governed her movements for 16 years. What she was describing was something further. She was describing stepping back from the humanitarian work, from the campaigns, from the public presence that had, since the divorce, been entirely self-directed: the Angola visit, the Bosnia visit, the landmines campaign, the continued engagement with AIDS charities and homeless initiatives, and the causes that had always been the most honest expression of what she believed her visibility was actually for. She was describing a private life, not a smaller public life, an actual private life. The thing she had never had. The person on the other end of the call asked her why. Diana said, "Because I want to be a mother first. I want William and Harry to have a mother who is present in the way that matters, not just present at the events. I've been present at the events for 16 years. I want to be present in the mornings." She paused. Then she said, "I'm 36 years old. I have been a public person since I was 19. I have given everything I have to a role that cost me everything I had. And I am still here. And I still have time. And I want to use what's left of the time for things that are mine." She said the words slowly. Not dramatically, in the manner of someone who has been carrying a decision and is placing it down for the first time in the presence of another person to see whether it holds its shape. It held. There is a version of this revelation that the press would have read as retreat, Diana abandoning the causes, Diana withdrawing from the public that had sustained her through the worst years, Diana choosing a wealthy man and a private life over the humanitarian purpose that had made her, in the years following the divorce, not merely famous but genuinely significant. That version misreads what she was describing. She was not abandoning the work. She had said she wanted to step back, not stop. Step back. There is a difference. The difference between a woman who has spent 16 years at the absolute front of every room she enters, and a woman who has decided that the front of the room is not the only place the work can be done. She had seen Mother Teresa do it, not on a stage, not in front of cameras, not with the institutional apparatus of a major public figure. In rooms. Quietly, one person at a time, she had sat with Mother Teresa and asked her about that, about how you did the work without the machinery around it, about whether it was possible to be effective without being visible. Mother Teresa had told her, the work that matters most is never photographed. Diana had carried that. The call continued. She talked about William. About the conversation they had had recently, the kind of conversation that is not unusual between a mother and a 15-year-old son, except when that son is second in line to a throne and has spent his entire conscious life being managed toward a future the institution has already designed for him. She said William had asked her, directly, what she was going to do, not about the relationship with Dodie, about her life, what it was going to look like in 5 years, in 10. She said she had not known how to answer him then, and that the not knowing had stayed with her across the weeks since, through the south of France and the return to London and the trip back to Paris. She said, "He's 15, he's already thinking about this, he's already trying to understand what I need so that he can factor it into how he thinks about his own future." That's not a 15-year-old's job. A 15-year-old's job is to not have to think about his mother's future. And I have to fix that. The person on the call said, "You are fixing it." Just by knowing it needs fixing, Diana said. "I know. But knowing isn't enough. I have to actually do it." She spoke about Dodie, not with the breathless infatuation the tabloids had printed across August, not with the performance of romance that the paparazzi photographs had been constructed to suggest, with the careful considering tone of a woman who had been badly hurt by one significant relationship and was approaching the possibility of another one, with the particular attention of someone who understands exactly what is at stake. She said he was kind. She said he made her laugh. She said he was not intimidated by her in the way that most men eventually were intimidated, not by her title or her fame, but by the particular quality of her attention, the way she was fully present in a conversation and required the person across from her to be fully present too. She said she did not know yet what it was. She said, "I'm 36. I've been wrong before, catastrophically wrong. In front of the entire world. I'm not in a hurry to be wrong again." She said it without bitterness. A fact. Near the end of the call, she said something that the person who received it has described, in accounts preserved across the years since, as the most Diana-like thing she said that evening, not the most revealing, not the most emotionally significant, the most Diana-like, in the specific sense of most consistent with the woman she was in rooms where no performance was required. She said, "I feel like I've been running for 17 years, and I'm so tired of running. And I actually think that I might be about to stop." Then she said, "Does that sound like giving up? Tell me honestly if that sounds like giving up." The person said, "It sounds like arriving." Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, that's what it feels like." The call ended sometime before midnight Paris time. The car was called. The decision was made to leave through the rear of the hotel, the Rue Cambon exit, to avoid the photographers gathered at the front on the Place Vendôme. Henri Paul was at the wheel. Trevor Rees-Jones was in the front passenger seat. Dodie was beside Diana in the rear. They entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at 12:23 in the morning on August 31st, Money Theft, 1997. At 12:24, the car struck the 13th pillar. Diana was pronounced dead at 4:18 that morning. She was 36 years old. The person who received the call did not speak about it publicly for years, not because the call was secret in any formal sense, but because there is a particular difficulty in being the last person someone spoke to before they died, a difficulty that is not about legal or institutional obligation, but about the simple human weight of holding something that belongs to someone who is no longer there to give it to anyone else. The call eventually became part of the documented record, filtered through the careful accounts of biographers who had earned, over years, the trust of those inside Diana's private circle. It was never published in full. It was never meant to be. What was preserved was its shape, its tone, the things she had said and the order she had said them in, and the way she had sounded, not distressed, not frightened, not performing anything when she said them. She had sounded like someone who had made a decision, like someone who had been running for 17 years and had finally, on a late evening in a hotel in Paris, allowed herself to stop and take stock of what was actually in her hands. What was in her hands was this: 2 sons she had raised well against considerable opposition towards something genuine. Work that had mattered, that had moved policy and changed laws and saved lives and sat beside the dying in rooms where no official presence had gone before. A private circle of people who knew who she was when the performance was not required, and the decision clear considered, arrived at across a summer of thinking to build a life that was finally in the full sense hers. She did not get to build it. The shock that the title of this story promises is not the shock of revelation. It is the shock of proximity, the shock of understanding that on the last evening of her life, Diana was not in the state the tabloid coverage of that summer had implied. She was not swept up in a romance, not adrift, not the passive subject of events moving around her. She was thinking clearly, planning carefully, describing, to someone she trusted, a future she had decided on. She was 36 years old and she was about to arrive. The call ended. The car was called, the tunnel was entered, and the future she had described, the private life, the mornings with her sons, the work done quietly in rooms that were not photographed, the stopping of the running closed before it could open. That is the truth that shocked everyone who eventually heard it. Not that she was afraid, not that she was desperate, not that the final hours contained some hidden crisis or undisclosed conflict or institutional conspiracy that the official record had suppressed. The truth was that she was fine. She was more than fine. She was clear. She had made a decision about her life, and she had told someone about it, and the call had ended well, the kind of ending a phone call has when both people know that what needed saying has been said. Then she got into the car, and that is the hardest part of the story. Not the darkness of the tunnel, the clarity of the call.